Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Report. The mission of our show here is to empower you to build generational wealth with real estate. I'm your host, Chris Berg, head of business development for Abernathy Holdings. We go out and build self-storage sites in California, Arizona, and soon to be beyond. And excited to introduce you to our guest today. I was fortunate to see him speak at a recent, UCL event in regards to affordable housing. Grew up in DC, played football at Notre Dame, played in the NFL for a few years, and now has found himself in commercial real estate. He's the CEO and founder of Langdon Park Capital, Malcolm Johnson. Malcolm, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Absolutely, Chris. Good to be with you, and thank you so much for having me on.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. Lots to get into and discuss. Let's just start with your story. I think it's fantastic how you go from DC to Notre Dame, the NFL, now found yourself within commercial real estate. So take us through the journey, and obviously coming out of the NFL, I'm sure you had a ton of opportunities. Why did you choose commercial real estate?
So, very interesting question, and I always have to say the same thing every single time. One, because it's true, but two, because I don't want to give anyone the impression that when I was 14 or 15 years old, writing down life goals, I said, well, first I'm going to go play at Notre Dame, winningest college football program of all time. And then I'm going to meet my college sweetheart as a 17-year-old freshman. And then I'm going to go to the NFL. And then I'm going to be a back. Like, none of that was what I wrote down. As a 14 or 15-year-old, so like you said, I was born and raised in DC. I was really blessed to have two amazing parents who were still with us. And I grew up in a very close-knit family in the city at a time when Washington, D.C. was a very homogenous community. So even though we lived in what in real estate terms, what would be described as a mixed income community, most of the folks in that community shared all of the same amenities, from the library to the local park to public school system, public transportation. So we got a really good perspective of what it meant to be working class and where our place in society was, which was only limited by opportunity. So my parents were very focused on education, and they gave my brothers and I the opportunity to go to some of the best schools in the city. So even though we were all really good athletes, the focus was always on education. So the decision to choose Notre Dame for college was kind of a no-brainer because at that time it offered the best combination of athletics and top-notch academics. But my goals as a teenager were to go play football for as long as I could, and then I would retire right back in the neighborhood and maybe work in the community, doing something to uplift people who look like the families who went to my church and schools, et cetera. But there's no linear path to success. And so, yes, I achieved some of those goals. The thing I wish I had done as now a mid-40s former athlete, I wish I had been more intentional about, I don't just want to make it to the NFL. I want to be a Super Bowl champion. I want to play for 15 years. So that actually taught me a lot about the power of intention. But yes, I did go to Notre Dame for undergrad. I majored in business. But my primary focus was, how can I use this platform to go do the thing that I love the most? And at that time, it was competing at the highest level in athletics. And fortunately, I did start for 3 years at Notre Dame, graduated in 1998 and was drafted in 1999. But I never focused on what I would use my academic training to go do after I was playing. So I was naturally curious. I majored in business and had a minor in sociology because I love to read and I love to debate. But I didn't know what I'd be able to apply that for after playing. Right around where the NFL average is. I played for 4 years in the league. And then I retired at 25. And so at that point, I had to figure out what was going to be next. And so the first step was actually getting my first job, which was more difficult than you would imagine. You said I had a lot of options. I didn't realize what those options even were. When I was 25 years old, coming out of playing pro football and really playing high-level football for the last 10 years of my life. But my first job was in the athletic department. The team I played for first in the NFL was Pittsburgh. So I was in Pittsburgh with my wife. And the only job I could get was as an unpaid intern at the University of Pittsburgh's athletic department.
Come
But
on.
for me, it was a great opportunity to get dressed up for work every day. I got to leave the house every morning at 7:15, and I worked in an office. I answered the phone professionally. I did every job you can imagine, and I did them all for free. But it was there that I realized, the athletic department, and many of your listeners who are college football fans will know this. The athletic department is run essentially like a corporation. You've got your sponsors, you've got paying customers who come to games every day, or watch the team on television. And so most of the senior leadership in that athletic department had masters in business. And so just thinking of how I could advance in that field led me to, well, maybe I should go get an MBA. And so after almost a year working at Pitt, I applied for business school. And for me, that's when I started to focus on what the next career option would be, maybe even outside of sports. And I purposely chose the most quantitatively challenging program I could get into. That was Carnegie Mellon. Fortunately, Carnegie Mellon is in Pittsburgh, so my wife and I didn't have to move. And while at Carnegie Mellon, I then started to explore careers in finance. So again, it was not by design that I landed in finance. It was more, first, let me go determine even what I could be good at, what my skill set is. And once I was in graduate school around a lot of other really smart people who were already focused, I began to hone what the next step would be.
So a lot to unpack there. First off, gosh, there's something I want to ask you about that. Let's just talk about that transition, because I've talked to a lot of guys I played with at Stanford which by the way, since you said you liked athletics and academics, we could have used you on the farm. Not sure what happened there, but we would have enjoyed having you there. But your transition from the NFL into what we call civilian work. And I say that because, some of my buddies that play, they're like, Chris, one night you're playing a Monday Night Football, and then the next week I'm in an office with a 23-year-old kid trying to teach me Excel. Like, it was just very difficult to deal with that transition.
Yeah, I will say one thing, that life will teach you no matter what situation, circumstance you're in, whether you're coming from the NFL, retiring and moving to another career, leaving one job, starting at another, starting a family, and, being a first-time parent, humility. And that for me was a great lesson learned. Just to give you a little bit of more detail on that. So the University of Pittsburgh's football team and the Pittsburgh Steelers actually share a practice facility. So, and this was true in the early 2000s when I was working at Pitt, and it's still true now. So, like I said, the only job I could get was an unpaid internship working in the athletic department at Pitt. A lot of my work centered on marketing for the football program, who at the time had a Heisman Trophy candidate named Larry Fitzgerald, who went on to an amazing NFL career. But literally, a part of my job at 25 years old, where every person I knew in Pittsburgh, my entire social circle, my entire professional circle, were current Pittsburgh Steelers players and coaches. Every day for work, I got to walk into the facility, and instead of going to the right and going in with my former teammates from the Steelers, I got to walk to the left entrance and go work at Pitt with college players. So that taught me a lot of humility right away. I had to be open to starting from the bottom, but that actually one of the best things I could have done to get the transition started. And the same was true when I got into Carnegie Mellon, and all of a sudden I'm sitting in optimization and classes that were so far beyond what I'd done even as an undergrad at Notre Dame. So I had no choice but to lean on professors and TAs and classmates who in many cases were several years, in some cases decades ahead of where I was in terms of business acumen. But that served me well. So without question, the transition is helped when you have some level of humility. But I think athletes naturally are equipped to succeed that way, because if you think about it, Chris, you were a high-level high school player. And then you get to Stanford, alma mater of John Elway, and Bill Walsh is the head coach, and you've got all kinds of greats on the team with you. John Lynch is there. So you have to be willing to, one, not forget what got you to Stanford, but you have to start over again. You got to prove yourself to teammates. You got to prove yourself to a coaching staff. Then when you get on the field, you got to fight to stay on the field. So there's some level of humility combined with the confidence that you belong, but you have to be humble enough to work hard to earn it all over again. And athletes have done that at almost every stage. The Olympics are coming up, and one of the things I love about the way the U.S. teams select their Olympians, especially for track and field events, gymnastics, there is an Olympic trial, and it doesn't matter whether you are the world record holder, whether you've won gold medals at previous Olympics. You have to go to the trials, and you have to compete for a spot on that Olympic team. So imagine the humility that you have to prepare, knowing, well, I'm good enough. I just won gold, and yeah, but that does not mean you're going to make this year's team. And we've seen examples of that every single Olympics. So I think athletes in particular, they've kind of built up the muscle of humility, because you do have to earn your spot. That's the ultimate meritocracy. And so that did prepare me in some ways for the transition, but was not easy. But it has helped me in every aspect of my professional life since.
Well, you bring up such a great point. You brought up the word intention. One of the things I appreciate about what you said at UCLA when you spoke about affordable housing, and we'll get to that, but how your mom was very intentional. And you said, hey, Chris, I learned that I wasn't maybe as intentional as I could have been when I was in college about my professional career. I felt the same thing. When I was in high school, I was very intentional about my collegiate career, but wasn't as intentional when I got to the farm. So I can appreciate what you're sharing there. And to add to that, just to get you to speak to the power of intention, is that, I don't know if you know the name Chris Kleiman, but he was the head coach at NDSU back in Fargo. They won a bunch of national titles. Now he's at K-State. But one of his great saying was, hey, yeah, we've had success here, but we're going to stay humble and stay hungry. And I think great athletes, as you talked about the Olympics, that's two traits that they have, is they're humble, but man, they're always looking for an edge and how to get better. So how is that power of intention bled throughout your life, and how is it impacting you today for your vision of Langdon Park Capital?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm glad we get a chance to talk about the work that we do here. And there's not a lot that transferred over in terms of technical skills from my playing days, but absolutely the mentality is one of the things that I lean on every single day. I was fortunate to have an amazing father who he himself was a college athlete and a successful entrepreneur while we were growing up. So he instilled a lot of that in me. But the focus on what it takes to succeed in that very moment, in that very endeavor, is what has allowed Langdon Park Capital to have some level of success. But I would say any business person, especially in real estate, has to be really intentional about what is it going to take to build this relationship so that that relationship turns into these transactions. Once we've got that transaction, what is it going to take for us to put together the right team to execute on a business strategy? And Langdon Park Capital is a real estate investment manager. We own and operate workforce and affordable, lowercase a, affordable housing in two markets across the country. One is Southern California, where our firm is headquartered, and another is Greater Washington, D.C., my hometown. But we've been really intentional about those submarkets because we know, one, there is unfortunately a very large supply-demand imbalance for safe, clean, high-quality, affordable housing in those submarkets. And also, it's exacerbated in communities of color. Both of those submarkets have large population of Black and Latino residents who are renters by necessity. And our team, because we have the lived experience in those places, because we come from the sort of backgrounds that our residents now live in, we have a very nuanced look at what creates real value for families who live in those places. And so we're uniquely positioned to essentially answer the bell. We're uniquely positioned to execute turnaround strategies at properties that others who might look at just financial returns only, just kind of traditional ways of creating amenities packages, might miss. So we have to think about one of the things that one of my college coaches, who's now in the College Football Hall of Fame, used to say all the time: win stands for what's important now. And another thing, this was Lou Holtz. He used to always say to the media, and people would get on him for this, when they say, well, this is the biggest game of the year. He said, well, if we win, next week is going to be even bigger. And if we win that one, the week after is going to be even bigger. So we have to focus on this week's game. It doesn't matter whether we're playing the Naval Academy or Florida State, Michigan, or USC. If we win this game, then next week becomes more important. so on and so on. And that's how we approach everything from market research to building relationships with owner operators and brokers in every city where we want to acquire new assets, capital partners. We have to win that moment in order to execute on the broader business strategy. And that, quite frankly, that is one of the things that was transferred over from my sports career.
So talk about your communication as far, I mean, the overall pictures you mentioned, hey, Chris, we're not just focused on the financial returns here. There's other areas that we're focused on to make an impact. So I want you to speak to that lens that you're walking into this through, but also from a standpoint of how you're communicating to your capital partners. I know you brought in institutional capital. How are you communicating with them? Because typically they're looking at just the finances, right? So what's the bridge for them to go, hey, this makes sense for us to invest with Langdon Park Capital?
Yeah, well, one of the tenets of any business is how big is the addressable market? And institutional capital is very efficient. They tend to flow to where there's opportunity and where there's some level of arbitrage. When you see a supply-demand imbalance, that speaks to opportunity, but how large is that opportunity? The majority, and this is statistically true and it's unfortunate, but the majority of residents in Southern California, Los Angeles County to be specific, the majority of residents in greater Washington, D.C. proper, Prince George's County, Maryland, just outside the border, Northern Virginia, Alexandria, the majority of residents, not only are they renters, but they're renters who are paying more than 30% of their take-home pay on their housing expense. So that tells you there is an acute need for housing that is affordable. But these are often families who are working 40 hours a week with pensions, with benefits. These are good, high quality tenants who just don't have access to housing that is safe, housing that is clean, a property services team that is responsive when there's some maintenance issue inside their unit. So those are the things that allow them to choose a Langdon Park Capital property over brand X. So we want to talk about how big the addressable market is. And then we talk about how our team, with senior professionals who've worked at some of the largest private equity firms in the world, who've worked at some of the largest financial institutions in the world in this very space. And yet we all come from the same sort of environment where our residents now live. So we're able to determine who's the best resident services partner to go into this building in Prince George's County, Maryland. What's important to a family, as I just alluded to, who's working 40 hours a week. The mom gets home at 6 p.m. every night. The dad comes home at 7:30 from a job, but your kids get out of school at 3:30, and your income does not allow you to be able to afford a nanny. You don't have access to childcare for that 3.5 hour gap. Well, if we can bring in a nonprofit partner who utilizes the clubhouse space at one of our assets as at that particular property as after school tutoring, you get a healthy snack, and all of this is funded by grants from this nonprofit partner. Well, that's an amenity that adds value to that building. Once we start spreading the word to future residents that this is available at this building, we're now able to attract a higher quality tenant. That translates into lower delinquency, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what investors then see as there's opportunity here. And that market, again, in every market cycle, there is demand for safe, clean, affordable housing. So being able to articulate that to investors is one of the key elements of our ability to attract capital.
I've been thinking about this conversation with you for a while, and I was wondering if you are communicating to your investors what I would call the multiplier effect. And here's what I mean. You continually talk about the housing you provide, and the first word that you use is safe. And I remember when I was back in LA a while back, one of my buddies I played ball with was down teaching at a school in central LA where it was, a lot of gangs, kids just literally trying to get to school and hopefully survive on that walk. Well, you and I both know that if you're just trying to get to school and you're in fear, your ability to ingest that education is really debilitated, right? So you're not getting as much maybe out of education as you potentially could if you had more safety around you. So is there any way for you to communicate the impact that you're making for these families and their children from a standpoint of education, where now I believe what you're doing is leveraging these tax dollars within the education system to improve the education within this community, to ultimately help them, go out and potentially get higher paying jobs, and it becomes this generational impact. Is there any way that you've been able to communicate that to investors effectively?
Yeah, well, first of all, you touched on something that we all know is one of our biggest challenges as a society. It's so multifaceted. It's not there's not a one size fits all solution. Housing is just one part of that solution to build stronger and better communities, and that's where we focus. But we do work really closely with nonprofit partners, both in the education space and in the healthcare space, two other areas that in communities where you are at or below the moderate income line, you tend to see less resources. And so we focus on one, what are we doing to make our communities look and feel like a community? Like we literally think about paint schemes. We think about how the person in the leasing office answers the phone. We think about whether or not the maintenance team speaks the language, and I mean literally speaks the language. We have a lot of Latino residents where English is a second language in Southern California, speaks the language of the resident in that community. And so then that creates some sense of pride in where they live. And just having that, believe it or not, is much more important for your psyche as you make that trip, like you just alluded to. As you make that trip, whether you're taking a bus, you're getting a ride to school from where you live to where you go to school every day. And then if you are an elementary or junior high school student at our property in Prince George's County, Maryland, coming back home to do after school tutoring, again, in a place that feels safe, then gives you this sense that there is hope for me, there is opportunity for me. Families tend to want to stay in those sorts of communities. It's all tied together, but we do work really closely with local nonprofits, local school systems to ensure that every part of the ecosystem is being strengthened as we do our part at the places where these families live.
So maybe you're not able to communicate that as like a bottom line finance piece. And I know a big part of what you're doing is the social impact, which has been, a big reason where you see a lot of money flowing into social impact groups. So is that more of how you're communicating to these investors or institutional money to say, this is why this is a good investment for you, or take us inside the room and take us through that dialogue?
Yeah, I'll tell you that's part of the communication, and it's very critical. It's one of the things I'm proudest to articulate when we're talking to investors. But make no mistake about it. If you're talking about making a choice between muted financial returns, lower financial returns, and something that has this level of impact, and higher financial returns where there's no impact, often the decision will be made based purely on those financial returns. So what we have to articulate is this is an investment that is viable in all parts of the cycle. This is an investment that when you have high demand for luxury product, there will still be a need for workforce housing in those same communities. When there's lower demand for luxury product, then the renter who was previously in a class B plus or A minus property is now looking at safe, clean workforce housing because the income level is lower. Like that's how we have to articulate why an investment in what we own and operate makes sense. And the impact is critically important. Our ability to execute on that is critically important. But most investors, especially in today's highly politicized world of what impact actually means, they have to think about the bottom line. And so we're able to articulate how vacancy rates are lower in workforce housing, how turnover is lower when you do it right, how we're close to transit, how we're close to city centers, and why there's always going to be demand for the properties that we own and operate. And that's what leads investors ultimately decide to allocate capital to our strategy and to Langdon Park Capital specifically.
I'm assuming you're always out looking for new properties to acquire. What are some of the key metrics you focus on as you're looking at acquisitions?
Yeah, really good question. So to go back to what I started the conversation about investors with, institutional investors really look to businesses that can scale. The challenge is that's a good idea. How large can that be? How can I, if I'm a pension fund, if I am a large asset manager, if I'm an insurance company, how can I allocate $500 million to this strategy? How big is that market? So in Southern California and in Washington, D.C., we're also trying to find assets in Northern California. We have not purchased anything in the Bay Area as of yet. We look for unit counts above 100. We look for larger assets We look for submarkets that are densely populated. And one of the challenges, quite frankly, has been trying to find opportunities where we can take advantage of public-private partnerships. Now that's becoming more and more prevalent today. What happens when the market is white hot? You find a lot of private capital that's willing to pay top dollar, and the public-private partnerships are not easy to navigate. There's usually a timing issue when you're acquiring assets from an owner who has 15 different buying options. They will most likely choose not only the highest price, most likely to close, and then quickest close. Well, in today's market, closing timeframes have been extended, so we now have a lot more opportunity to negotiate alongside public housing authorities, alongside nonprofit entities that will provide the resident services, and that's giving us an advantage. There are tax benefits to having nonprofit partners in the ownership structure alongside us, and we can afford the longer lead time to actually source these deals. But one of the reasons we've chosen the markets we have is because there tend to be larger deals available for us to source in the bigger markets.
I'd love to know your assessment of the LA market. I'm asking this because I think there's some people that are long LA, and you look at, you've got the World Cup coming here, the 2028 Olympics. There's other people I talk to, very, very well versed in real estate. They're like, I wouldn't touch LA with a 10-foot pole. We love LA and California because it's harder to develop here. So we feel like that keeps out a lot of people. But I'm curious your assessment of the LA market.
Yeah, I think we tend to have the same view you do about the barriers to entry being actually an opportunity for us to have even bigger footprint here. I say the same is true for real estate investors that we have not into the New York City market. But if you think about the affordable housing, workforce housing space in New York City, two of the largest companies in the world who do that, Related and LaFrac, have been exclusively in those submarkets for decades, precisely because there are high barriers to entry, it's highly regulated, and they do it better than almost anyone. And so that's where we would like to be in our target markets. I will say one of the things that makes us a couple of things that make us most bullish on Southern California. One, there is kind of a natural barrier to entry. You can only go so far west before you run into the Pacific Ocean. But two, real estate fundamentals are really strong because there's a diverse set of job drivers here in Southern California. You've got obviously entertainment, but there's hospitality, there's technology, there's finance, there are government jobs, there's defense contracting. There are a number of industries that will always be here, and those industries attract workers at all income levels. And so that's one of the things we like most about Southern California. I'll also say, and this is one of the good things about having the mission we do and having it be authentic from our leadership team down to our most junior person. There's an administration here in Southern California, Mayor Karen Bass, although she's been on the job for just over 100 days, she's shown a real willingness to, one, dialogue with, and two, work with owner operators who have a stated mission and a demonstrated mission of actually supporting initiatives that will provide more affordable and attainable housing. And so having that dialogue, having the city as a partner is a good thing. I would say that's not the case for every owner operator who's coming in and just looking to maximize profit at any cost for residents.
So let's talk about your mission and the vision. What's the vision for Langdon Park Capital, and what's the mission?
Yeah, so we're now at just over 3.5 years old, and I always say the hardest step is the first one. So we've taken the first, second, and maybe third step. So that's a blessing, and it's due in large part to having really good partners. We were fortunate at the outset to build a partnership with a firm called Kennedy Wilson. Their leadership team, led by Bill McMorrow, Matt Windish, two former clients when I was at JP Morgan. They were a partner from day one. We have a relationship with Eldridge Industries. Eldridge is based on the East Coast, but they have a large footprint of portfolio companies here in Southern California. But most importantly, we have an amazing team, from our acquisitions to our asset management folks, who really understand the submarkets where we source and then acquire and ultimately operate. deals from a lived experience perspective, and they came from some of the best academic and professional backgrounds. But this mission spoke to them. How can we preserve housing for families who are often the afterthought in these big, expensive submarkets? So that's been one of the keys to our early success. We've got just over 145 million in AUM. The goal is for us to nearly double that within the next year and a half. The market has to cooperate to some extent. There's one thing about capital. This is why we were successful in attracting capital early in our formation. There were a lot of opportunities. And again, as I spoke about how our business is one of market cycles, there was this sentiment that just having a durable return is probably good enough. And that was 2021. And having impact was really high level for a lot of institutional investors at that time. Well, now you can go get higher returns if you invest in credit products. You can get higher returns, frankly, if you're just investing in T-bills than you could 3 years ago. And so we've got to be very methodical in approaching investors and describing what we are doing is core plus to maybe value add investing, but we're built to make solid returns for the long haul. And so that's why we have not accelerated from 145 million to 500 million in AUM over the last 3 years. But I certainly think there will be more opportunities to do that as we see distress, as we see owner operators who came into this space without the expertise, now looking to offload properties that they realize, I was never going to get a 20 IRR on that deal. Well, we think a 14 is perfectly okay, and that's a deal we'd love to have at a much lower basis. So that's where the opportunities lie for us to grow our AUM by double in the next year and a half. And within the next 5 years, I literally was just talking to our head of acquisitions this morning, and we got our company retreat coming up in another week. And so we're going through goals and what we want to talk to the team about. I still am very much convinced that we can be at 5 billion, and with a B, 5 billion in AUM within the next 8 years. So there are levels to this. We've gotten off to a good start. The demand is still very high. The supply is still extremely limited. And we do have the right team to go approach the market and actually execute.
Just a couple more questions, Malcolm. I'm really grateful for your time. I want to be respectful for it. Hopefully we can have you back as you continue to grow and reach that $5 billion of AUM. And I want to keep this open, but I also want to add some color to it. So question overall is, where do you see and how do you see tech, prop tech, whether it's AOI, whatever, impacting your business? And one is, we talk about the mission of the show is helping people build generational wealth with real estate. You and I both know in minority communities, homeownership is one of the biggest levers to do that. There's a big conversation with a lot of people, including Larry Fink from BlackRock, around tokenization of assets. Do you see an opportunity to begin to tokenize your assets and help part of this rent go towards equity for your families? Have you considered that? Is that something that's come across your table?
Yeah, so again, all really excellent questions, and ones that we have to spend a lot of time thinking about. Our business is, because it's a brick and mortar business, does not mean we have to be stuck in the brick and mortar age. Artificial intelligence is here to stay, and its capabilities are only increasing as we continue to grow. Literally, in the past quarter, we just added to our arsenal a technology that allows us to underwrite nearly 15 times the amount of deals on a weekly basis. And as you know, just sourcing more opportunities provides you with the ability to then go close more opportunities. So with the mighty 3-person acquisitions team, we're now able to access exponentially more deals because of this technology that is used by some of the biggest firms in our business. But it was a great investment for us. The cost was less than, quite frankly, cost us less than hiring or training a junior analyst who probably would not be as capable right away as what we need to grow our business. So that's one example of us embracing technology to access more deals. And to your earlier question about AI, there is some AI capability built into this technology that allows us to look at what operating expenses will be, what operating expenses are projected to be on some of the assets that we're targeting. So all of that helps us grow. We're always open. The other thing I'll say, and you mentioned earlier, about us being willing to bring on former athletes. Like, one is affinity because of all the things that I said about the skills that athletes bring to the table in terms of tenacity, humility, determination, willingness to work in a team. But the other thing I really like about it, so every summer, even dating back to our first year in existence, we've had interns who were in college, and the large majority of our interns have been student athletes. Last year, we had a soccer player from the University of Iowa. Just a few weeks ago, we had in for about a week a football player from Northwestern University. We actually had a year and a half ago former NFL player, former Super Bowl MVP named Malcolm Smith, who spent the summer with us. But the reason we like those types of interns is because they've been in class more recently and they've been forced to be hyper focused because they've got limited time they had to compartmentalize. These are guys and gals who have practice to juggle. They've got busy study schedules to juggle. And so we love having them come in and give us ideas on optimizing the way we work. That to me is gold. And the other thing, this is, one of the reasons I like having just young people around. They will often ask, because I did this, and I do this a lot with our team today. They'll often ask questions like, why are you doing it that way? What does this mean? Explain that to me. And you can lose sight of that as a 25-year veteran in the business that, hey, this is the way it's always been done. But if you hear it from somebody who's literally just now learning what a cap rate is, what NOI is, why an investment committee report needs to have this market study and these pictures, like, that forces us to rethink how we're doing things. That forces us to rethink, are we being very efficient? We had this intern from Northwestern basically come in and audit each of our property websites. And he was doing it from kind of an end user's perspective. He said, most people are going to go 4 or 5 clicks when they're going to look for an apartment, and you need to have more pictures of what the interior looks like, because if I can't see it, then I'm probably going to move on to the next building 1 block away. And so that was like real-time feedback, and we started to update our property websites for that very reason. So the combination of embracing new technology and also embracing younger, fresher thinking is a key to us continuing to grow and be able to adapt and adjust.
I may have to find out more about your underwriting software that you just mentioned, because it sounds incredible.
Absolutely.
Last question for you. You've been around some amazing leaders, Lou Holtz, Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan. I don't even know who your head coaches were in the pros or other quarterbacks or leaders you've been around. Greatest leader you've been around or been mentored by, and why?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because again, I was so fortunate, and I am so fortunate. I had my dad every single day, and I don't know that I fully appreciated him while I was living at home. Actually, I skipped a grade when I was in elementary school, so I graduated from high school at 16, and my dad was very, very tough on me and my younger brothers. So I was really happy to go. I was ready to go leave the nest, and then lo and behold, I got to Notre Dame, where the head coach was Lou Holtz, who was a lot like my dad in terms of communicating. My dad was a little easier. One thing he always did, he would put his arm around us and say, "I love you and I'm proud of you," but he was very, very tough in making us earn that compliment. But then there was an assistant coach I had at Notre Dame who went on to be a great college football coach named Urban Meyer. Urban was in his mid-30s when he came to Notre Dame. I was only 18 years old when he showed up on campus. I hadn't played a lot, so he was still trying to prove himself as a coach. He coached wide receivers. I played wide receiver, and he was so incredibly honest with me. So as a leader, one of the things that I've adapted always is trying to be extremely transparent with our team. And he was very brutal in delivering "you're not good enough, but here's what you need to do. You're not good enough, but here's what you need to do," or "you are good enough, and here's why I know you're going to go win on Saturday." Like, that was everything. And obviously went on to have tremendous success at Florida and at Ohio State. When I got to the pros, my first head coach was Bill Cowher, who has this reputation of being a tough guy. But the thing about Bill, first of all, when you get to pros, you get to call your coaches by their first name. So it's a much different dynamic. he was very willing to listen to his veterans. So Jerome Bettis and Cordell Stewart and Levon Kirkland, they could walk up to Bill at practice and say, you know, we're ready. We're ready. We don't need to do the last 30 minutes of practice, or we're not ready. We need to go back and do 7-on-7 one more time. And he was very open to that. I think that's one of the reasons he had so much success in Pittsburgh. And then, without question, being fortunate enough to work at JP Morgan. And I didn't work directly with Jamie Dimon, but I was close enough to see how much he, one, knew about every line of business inside of JP Morgan, which is extremely difficult when you think of how broad that company's tentacles are in terms of what they do. But he trusted each of his leaders to be, one, men and women of integrity, and two, be excellent and subject matter experts at their jobs and hyper focused on customer service. So learning from that combination of leaders, Jamie Dimon, Bill Cowher, Urban Meyer, Lou Holtz, and like I said, my father. So I got a good blueprint, but you know this too, Chris. You are an entrepreneur. You are an owner. At the end of it all, you can only be yourself. So you can take bits and pieces. You can learn from other leaders, but you have to be who you are, and that will ultimately lead you to be successful in your own way.
If you don't mind, one last thing, just because I think what you said about Jamie Dimon is fascinating. So that's a little bit more transferable, right? Jamie Dimon to what you're doing today versus maybe Urban Meyer, Lou Holtz. So what have you transferred from Jamie Dimon into your leadership today at Langdon Park Capital?
You know, he was really good at displaying authentic empathy. One of the things that he actually instituted, and this was before I even joined the firm, he'd started this, was a bus tour, where Jamie and his senior leadership team would literally get on a bus. So again, this is the CEO of the most successful financial services company in the world. They get on a bus and go to about 30 cities across the US, and most of their market stops started and ended with a very extensive visit to every retail branch in that submarket. So this was San Francisco, Los Angeles, Oakland, Chicago, Washington, D.C. And that bus tour allowed him to have the pulse of the company. And obviously he'd stop at, JP Morgan's corporate office in Los Angeles, which is where he and I first started to interact. He meet with the real estate team, meet with investment bankers. But getting down to every level of the company allowed him, and he would show up at each of the meetings, and he'd usually be in jeans and comfortable shoes, maybe a polo shirt. And he got to speak to employees at every level of the company and get real-time feedback, messaging that he was delivering to Wall Street and Congress and senior leaders at the company was being received by retail branch workers and retail customers. So it's a lot easier. We've got 5 team members, so I'm able to get feedback in real time without having to get on a bus and travel the country for 2 weeks every year. But that was really telling. I don't know how many big bank CEOs would get on a bus and go visit employees and customers in the way that he did, but that gave him a great deal of empathy. And we tried to adopt some of that at Langdon Park Capital as well.
Love that. I mean, it brings up for me one of the things as of late is just my mantra has been just do the work. Do the work. As you know, as an athlete, you just did the work and good things would happen. So, Malcolm, again, thank you so much for the time, the insight. Want to give you a chance. Anything else you want to share that I haven't asked you? And then most importantly, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so thank you. You've got the website up on the screen, so they can reach out to us there. We're active on LinkedIn. The other thing I would note, and we didn't touch on this at all, this is probably another conversation with maybe some of our partners. We're actually hard at work on our next venture. It'll be a co-GP fund focusing on bringing former athletes into the fold and giving them the opportunity to invest at the GP level into a lot of what we do already. And we're excited to be building this with another best-in-class workforce housing sponsor who in their own right has been kind of the gold standard in our business. And that hopefully will allow us to attract even more institutional capital. So, we've been working on that now for the better part of 6 months. So by the end of 2024, we'd like to be able to go out to market with the co-GP fund that will finally allow a lot of former professional, current and former professional athletes to invest as owners in a lot of what we do. So really excited about that. But most importantly, just excited that you, Chris, are shining a bright light on the work that we're doing and the work that entrepreneurs like us are doing every single day. So appreciate you giving us this platform. Much continued success. I look forward to growing with you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that. I just love what you're up to as far as serving the communities that you're serving and your mission behind it. And near and dear to my heart is what you just mentioned. You talk to so many former athletes that are either struggling financially with their identity. So when you get ready to launch that, please let me know. Let's have you back. We'll have that conversation, and there may be some other people to connect you with. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris. Let's have a great one.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Okay, be good.